Hello and welcome to the MHG podcast. As usual, in fact, more than usual this week, life can be a little bit miserable and a little bit dark, but we're here to attempt to bring you as much light and as much joy as possible. I'm Bradley. I am joined by Stu, but it is another fragmented episode, unfortunately, because we both have lives and we can't get together this week. So I'll go through my stuff. Stu will do his stuff, integrate any bits he needs to if he needs to comment. You know the drill. To start with, the world's just messed up. Faults are with everyone affected, especially the three poor little girls who have been brutally murdered in Southport. Whatever the reasonings was behind it, it's just we've lost three innocent lives, and it's so sad, and that should be enough to be grieving. We should be going. The person's been caught who did it. Three innocent girls are no longer with us, and we grieve for them. We grieve for the injured, but people have decided to use this as an excuse to spread hate. And that is... I don't really have the words to see. You've got a community that's grieving in Southport, or trying to grieve, and then you've got a bunch of far-right fascists, people up for just, the English Defence League were there, all of that, turning what was a peaceful vigil into riots, attacking a mosque, for no other reason than the person who did this potentially had links to Rwanda. Which they've decided uneducatedly is a Muslim country, when in fact it's actually mainly a Christian country. But regardless, religion doesn't come into it. It's an individual who has done something atrocious, and regardless of age or anything like that, the law has to punish them as is deemed fit. It doesn't need vigilante justice. He's been caught, and the police have the person. They targeted a shop as well, which wasn't needed. It's just hate. It's an excuse to spread hatred. And one of the things we always convey here, and my own personal ethos, is you cannot defeat hate with hate. You can only defeat hate with love, and we continue that. This is why we do this. We continue to try and enjoy video games, try and spread sort of like, tolerance, inclusivity, and just loving our fellow humans. But it's sad. There's no clever, funny link, segues or anything this week, because really not in the mood. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much other stuff has gone on, but it's not even time to cover. But yeah, faults with everyone. But with that being said, we do try and bring the positivity. So I've got two games I want to talk about this week. It's been a really busy few weeks of video games, actually. A bit of a drought on the indie scene, I think. But on the AAA scene, rather, on the indie scene, it's been absolutely flooded. And you can see I spoke about 4 alone this week in the indie roundup. Go and check that out, by the way, on the site. I spoke about Ete, Arranger, Thank Goodness You're Here, and Galactic Glitch. Thank Goodness You're Here, by the way, it's just absolutely... If you want a feel-good pick-me-up game, get Thank Goodness You're Here. I laughed and smiled all the way through that. Some of the best comedy writing in a video game ever. Anyway, another game I've been playing is more of a dark comedy, shall we say. It's a visual novel. called Vampire Therapist. We done an interview with the developers a few months back, and you can see that on the site. And it's basically, you take on the role of a therapist, a vampire therapist, and you basically talk to various different vampires through different time periods, and they talk to you about everything that's going on in their lives. It's really weird. It actually talks about a lot of cognitive issues, a lot of what personal baggage you might carry, what emotions you might have, relationships, all that kind of thing. It's all there that you'd have in everyday life, that you would have in every day, but it's framed around, obviously, around vampires. Which is just a really good way to it. It's a bit of dark comedy to it. It really does, and there's some really sort of like quite amusing moments in it. But overall, it's done in a way that allows you to self-reflect. But anyway, you're listening to these characters talk, and you have options for giving them advice, and it's multiple choice options, and obviously, you choose an option, they'll respond to it, and you just go through that. That is pretty much the game. They are all your clients, they're all vampires, and it's got a general message of learning to accept yourself, learning to be kinder to yourself. It tries to spread positivity, but without being condescending. It's one of those games that approaches mental health in a really nuanced way. It does it without talking down to you, without being preachy. It teaches you to accept that, look, we all have our issues, we all have our foibles, none of us are perfect, no matter how much some of us might think we are or not. And it's you accept yourself. And I started playing this, and to be honest, I had to put it down initially, not because it's a bad game or anything, but because I got quite emotionally involved with the game, with the stories, and I wasn't in a good place myself at the time to be able to handle that. But I've now played through more of it, and got through to the end, and some of it is ludicrously out there because it is a fantasy world, and as I say, it does bring the laughs. But the biggest thing about it is it's got heart. It's got a lot of heart, and just the way it just embeds itself in you. I finished the session one evening, went to bed, and just laid there thinking. Just left me there thinking about it. And it's really, really interesting. And I don't want to spoil too much. I don't want to sort of like tell you about the mechanics too much or where it goes, because I think you need that for yourself. Everyone's journey with this, even though it's quite a linear experience in many ways, it's going to be very personal to you. What you take from it is going to be personal because it uses real therapy based ideas. So it uses like behavioural therapy concepts that are there, and it's, according to the developers, they've used licensed therapists to actually make sure all this is correct. They're not trying to do anything dangerous. They're not actually trying to therapize yourself. But you could definitely take a lot from it. And what's really good, it's all fully voiced, which is really, really good, and that adds to it. And they've got like voice actors from the likes of Hades and Baldur's Gate and things like that are in there. And they are brilliant voice actors. If you played those games, you know that the emotion they bring in those games, from the characters, they are spectacular, and this is all carried through here. It's taken so well, and there are little mini games and things like that within the game that break things up a little bit, but it all adds to an overall experience which is absolutely impactful. I think, is the right word for it. I don't want to say it's wonderful, because it's not, at times it isn't wonderful. It's not meant to be a wonderful game, but it is just so well made, and it has a target audience. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't think you're going to get your Call of Duty crowd. I don't think you're going to get your FIFA crowd rushing to this and all of a sudden going, "Oh, I'm going to look deep within myself." I think you've got to be open to the idea of the visual novels and the idea of storytelling. And I don't mean to diminish those people who like games. You like those games, that's fine, but it's not going to change anything from those. If you don't do visual novels, then it's not going to do anything for you. I don't think you do need that. But I say it's absolutely essential if you're into those, and it says a lot of positive things and a lot of emotional things, and honestly, check it out. Vampire Therapist is absolutely essential in my opinion. So next up is another game that it's actually pretty feel good, and I wanted to kind of theme these a little bit this week because of everything that's going on. This is from the game is A Star Named EOS or EOS. I never know what that is. It's to do with cameras anyway. And it's from the people who've done Behind the Frame, among other things. And it's just a story-based puzzle adventure that is centred around photography. And there's been quite a few photography games released over the past couple of years in the indie scene. And they've all been of various different parts of quality, but I think they've all been very interesting. And this is another one that I find incredibly interesting. So you've got a story, and a lot of it is about recreating photos that you might see, old photos. You've got to recreate the composition. It goes different places, and it's some sort of like clever puzzle work that goes on with it. Some truly beautiful and evocative animation and art style that goes with it as well. I want to say not quite Studio Ghibli-esque, but it's kind of got that feel to it. It's kind of a soft pastel texture to the overall feel of the characters, and there's lots of things going on in the background, and it just feels absolutely beautiful for the most part. And like, you take on the role of a young photographer called Day, and follow on their journey, and you kind of receive, like, it's to do with following with what Day's mother, like his mother's absent, and he's following in her footsteps. It's a journey of self-discovery. And it goes places. And again, it's another one of those games that's got such an impactful story to it. This is happening more and more in indie games, where I don't want to say too much, because again, you need to discover this stuff for yourself. But what I really like is that the puzzles that are on this journey with you are not difficult, but they don't feel like filler either. It really feels like they have a place within the game and within the world. And much like Vampire Therapist before it and other games, it's now becoming a norm where we're getting these things fully voiced. And it really adds to the atmosphere. And what we're seeing now, none of the voice acting stunted. It all feels completely natural, and it allows you to get fully immersed in the world. And again, it's the camera work on it is really, really good. It's not using all modern techniques. It feels very retro in terms of it is sort of point and click, but it relies on you to really focus on composition rather than effects and things like that. And then you click, you go, and that's part of the main aspect of it. And then the puzzles range from simple like tile blocks and things to maybe sort of like just very basic twisty type puzzles and logic puzzles and things like that. Just to keep you engaged. It's a weird one where I could say that the puzzles aren't needed. They're not essential to the game, but at the same time, when I said that about games before, it's usually in a way that the puzzles being there actually detracts from what the main game should be and what you actually want to get from the game. This doesn't do that. It actually breaks up the game nicely, but I don't think the game would lose anything through not having them, but I think it also gains by having them. It's a very difficult thing to put into words, why they're there. But I said, the main bulk of this is the story, and the photography is just absolutely outstanding. It won't take you forever to complete. It's one you can sit down, headphones on, Steam Deck if you wanted to, or on desktop PC if you want a bigger experience. But it is just simply beautiful. And again, I think there's another game in the times we're in at the moment with uncertainty in the world that I think brings a certain catharsis to it. It brings a certain amount of tranquility in a way that is very much needed. And much like Vampire Therapist, I actually think this is absolutely essential to have. Absolutely brilliant. And that's it for this week. Loads and loads of games, more to come next week, absolutely plenty to come. But I'm going to go do my bit now because Stu needs to talk about his games, which I'm sure are just as deep and emotional as what I've been playing. So I'll shut up now and hand over to Stu.
Yeah, cheers, Brad. And a very different week from myself. I've not played many games, but I've played one fairly significant release, which is EDF 6, Earth Defense Force 6. Weirdly, my very first step into the world of EDF, which is a little bit of a shock, as you know that I like my third-person action, I like all that kind of stuff. Anything where you blast things into little bits generally lands pretty well with me as long as it's good quality. And obviously quality is one of the things that's often talked about with the EDF series, that it's deliberately, in a way, I'm saying, janky. And I don't even mean that as a slight or a shade. It's like it's got a rep of being kind of lower tier but really good fun, messy, rough around the edges, kind of like your kind of rough uncle of the gaming world. And it's a funny one because following it over these last few years, it's been going for a long time now, and it's one of the rare, I would say, cult series. That's cult with an L, all right? One of the cult game series. And it's like, it's funny, I feel like it can be a bit harder to have a cult game, because if you think about cult TV or cult films, they tend to kind of, they have their moment in the sun, and then getting hold of them can be really difficult afterwards when they've been on cinema or they've had their first blush of being on the streaming services, and they fall off the radar, and they're kept alive by people loving them. Whereas with games, you can pretty much buy everything. There are notable exceptions and there are irritations, especially with things like Nintendo's eShop and the fact that, Xbox games are disappearing and they're shuttering sites. But broadly, by and large, if you want to get hold of a game, you can get hold of a game without a lot of effort, and it'll be in the conversation. It might be not in a massive conversation, but there'll be at least a little subset, a little group who talk about it, and you can connect with them. You can probably play it online still, even if it's because the community have kept it alive. And with the likes of Discord and all of that, there's more ways to connect to games than there are really to films and TV. And yeah, I feel like EDF has carved out a strange niche as having quite a big impact in a cultural way, but in a kind of culty cultural way. And it's still not really been mainstream, although it's quite big. It's a very odd one. Anyway, so yeah, I engaged with it. I've been playing it on my Steam Deck, and it's kind of what I expected. So you're a soldier type who goes up against a great load of aliens and monsters, and you have to shoot them. And on where it kind of stands out, where it kind of differentiates, does it in a couple of neat and notable ways. It has a very big area of play. Number 6. I don't know if the others do. I assume they kind of do as well. It has a very big area of play. And in that area of play, all, or at least most, of the objects and buildings are destructible. Now, that's still really uncommon in a lot of games. You just don't see it that much because it's really hard to implement and make sure a good game comes out of it. But yeah, I mean, it's not massively sophisticated. The buildings have fracture lines and they fall according to the fracture lines. But it really does add to the gameplay. And one of the reasons it does that is because the creatures that you're fighting are on a pretty epic scale. They're really big. They're dozens of times larger than yourself, and some of them are as big as buildings themselves. So they can climb buildings with ease. And the fact that they climb and that they use buildings as cover is part of the gameplay, part of the fun. The whole environment being this, or at least to where I've played, urban areas with like big obstructions being buildings and you can blow them up. It really plays into the game. And not having sightlines of stuff, so you're tasked with destroying certain creatures in a certain time, and you won't be able to see where they are, so you won't know the size of the force and that kind of a thing. And there's a radar, and that's great. And the buildings, as I say, are destructible, and you can knock things off the buildings. You can get the buildings to fall on creatures. All that side is really good fun, and it sort of stands out in a year where Helldivers came out, Helldivers 2, that it really does feel like a different beast, if you pardon the expression. Very different beast, because for a start, it's got a very single player focus, or at least the fact that you can play it online in a cooperative group isn't the focus necessarily. There are tons and tons of missions. The AI partners are good. They don't end up getting just wiped out immediately. I've played missions on both normal difficulty and easy difficulty, and there doesn't, to its credit, there doesn't seem to be a massive gulf between the two, and there's 2 more difficulty levels above that you can choose. But on normal, which is where I've played it most, you don't feel like the AI are just a bunch of clowns running around, honking their horns, falling into pits and getting annihilated within seconds, which is great. They are actually useful. And to bolster that, you can be one of, at the moment I've got 4 different character types, and they have very different loadouts, and the good thing is they do conform to your sort of fairly standard stereotypes of, you got your fast but not very strong and that are kind of magic-y based, although they're all guns, but the guns that fire like effectively magic bolts, that kind of a amalgam and analogy. And you've got your heavy, tanky ones, and you've got ones who are specialists in snipers and all that kind of thing. But the good thing is that you earn different weapon loadouts very, very fast. So you'll go through a mission early on, and you'll find that after it, you've been awarded a completely different weapon type. And as you'll know, like a lot of games of this style just gatekeep the good weapons, and so you've done a lot of grinding. Not with this. It's very generous with handing them out. And yeah, the missions can be a little bit repetitive, but the combat loop is pretty fun. So your weapons feel like they do a lot of damage, and they have that real impact. It doesn't matter which loadout you select. Some are obviously more powerful than others. Some have a longer cooldown, all of that stuff, but they all feel useful. And the reason is because they pack the stage with absolutely tons and tons of creatures. And that, again, is not a very common thing, especially not in what you'd class as a modern game. You get it in Muzu games, obviously, like Hyrule, whatever it's called, but you don't tend to get it a lot in games, and it's lovely to see, and it does bring a different, unique kind of perspective to these sorts of things, because even in Helldivers 2, you are conscious of the fact that, there's a huge swarm of bugs coming towards you, and you're desperately trying to fend them off, but also that that the difficulty is ramped so that there being 6, 12 enemies on screen means you're going to die, or you're only going to just scrape through it. And if you peer hard, you can tell that there's no more enemies than that on the screen, that they're hidden or they haven't spawned. You don't get that in EDF 6, so there are tons of them all the time, pretty much always visible. The downside of that is that it runs pretty badly on the Steam Deck. I think I've heard that it's very CPU bound, this game. Doesn't really draw on the graphics card, which, you can tell that by the fact that the graphics are completely naff. They basically look like, 360 era. it's not really about that. They have their own charm. It's a bit of a retro throwback in terms of how it looks, and that doesn't matter whatsoever. But with it being so CPU bound, it doesn't run very well on Steam Deck. Now, that's fine. It's not really been geared towards it. No problem. We understand this. But also, there are no real graphics options, so you can't really tweak much to get the best out of it. I, locked it at 40 frames per second, and that seems to have done the trick mostly, but it still dips below that. Doesn't perform brilliantly, but that, as I say, separate thing. You're probably going to be playing it on your PC or on console, so no worries there. And yeah, the feedback from the weapons is good. The separate, you can like change your loadout pretty quickly between missions. You got lots of options there. It stops it getting boring. The huge variety of not variety of enemies, but the huge number of enemies is a real plus, as I say. And I've not played it online, but I'm guessing if you get into a good team, it'd be a lot of fun. So it feels exactly like what I was led to believe. It's like, this is what I was told about EDF, and it's absolutely true. So it's really daft. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's just supposed to be a laugh a minute bit of fun. Never think it's going to really influence any other games in the genre. It's a throwback to stuff that was popular 20 years ago, and it has its own niche. It doesn't really do anything that anyone else is doing at the moment. Blessing and a curse, as usual, when that's the case, but I think it's more blessing than curse. So it's a very lightweight experience. I can't comment on how people who come into the series after playing however many predecessors there are, because I know there are more than 5, because there are offshoots and stuff. I don't know how much uniqueness or individuality you'll find in this entry, whether it brings much more to the table than the other stuff and the earlier titles. But for me, coming into it fresh, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It's good fun, and I'll happily jump back in and play the odd mission here and there. Not one that's going to consume your life, I don't think. Not one that you're going to think, oh, I've got to crack through 3, 5, 20 missions in a day. Not, I've got to sharpen and hone my skills. I've got to get all of the rest of the missing weapons I haven't got. I don't think you're going to be feeling like that. I certainly didn't. But I think you'll be definitely happy to dip back in once in a while, every now and again, happy at the purchase. Chuck half an hour at it and be fairly chuffed with the outcome. So very pleasant, very relaxing, even though it's about alien invasion. A fun little experience, I think, that deserves, from what I've played, it deserves its reputation. Yeah, so as Brad mentioned, we're recording separately. Apologies we've had to do that. It's just, life stuff really got in the way very heavily this week. I'm not really going to talk on any of the sad topics that Brad covered, but obviously, as usual, without even having heard everything that Brad said yet, I will no doubt 100% agree with his sentiments, because he's always right about these things, and he's a compassionate person, and we all feel the pain that's been caused by the events of this week and the disruption, and we can't say that we haven't seen it coming. It's stuff that we've talked on in the past. There's always one trigger point, one flash point that brings these things to the fore, and it's people expressing their sadness, anger, displeasure, sometimes in the right ways, often in the wrong ways, not condoning anything individually, just pointing out that it's a very societal thing that you can see. And there's never any excuse for violence against any person or individual, or group of people for any reason whatsoever. And it should never be perpetrated. But this isn't a lecture. It's just to say, that we obviously feel the sadness and the disappointment of everything that happened. And we're always here to be talked to. Feel free to drop us a line, speak to us on Discord, as we always say at the end of every week's episode. Don't feel like you're alone in your feelings about the world. And with that, we'll leave it there. So as usual, follow all of our content. Make sure you're joining us on the socials. Make sure that you're chatting to us if you feel like you'd need the support, or even if you just want to talk about light topics and gaming, or anything else that you want to cover. And apart from that, in the meantime, stay safe and stay sane.